Our society is a lot less confined to a particular geographical location than they were in the past. In other words, people move around a lot more than they used to. Back in the day, say when they settled this area or different parts of the country, people would homestead. They would get a huge tract of land. It would be given to them by the government or whatever means necessary, and they would live there. They'd build their house. They'd have a farm, and then that farm would get passed down from generation to generation. So maybe 5, 6 generations would live on the same land, and eventually it gets a little bit crowded because you know how you have kids and grandkids and all that sort of thing, and the population of your farm ends up becoming a little town or a city of itself. But that is kind of the way it was settling this country back in the day. But in reality, in all of human history, we have had to uproot and go places based off of employment or to chase the food. Like when we were hunters and gatherers, if the herd of buffalo went west, we had to follow that herd of buffalo, or else you die because you don't have enough food. So really, we're kind of returning as a culture, as a society, to be a lot more mobile than we have in the past. For example, an average person throughout their lives, the old statistic would be that you change jobs 5 to 7 times throughout your course of life. Back in the day, employers would bribe you, or they would buy your loyalty, or maybe lock you into a job so that you couldn't move through quote-unquote benefits. That 30 years later, when you try to collect those benefits, you find that you didn't get everything perhaps that you were promised. And so, things are not so well. So, people used to be more loyal to their jobs. Nowadays, millennials, which are people generally born between 1980 and 1982, all the way up till kids that are like 18 years old today, they have been classified as millennials. That the average for them is 11.7 jobs in their lifetimes. I myself have had 11 to 12 jobs. That's, you have different summer jobs. You have different jobs that you engage in when you're in college, trying to save up for those ramen noodles, those types of things. And also, you find out that some of your kids or grandkids, that whenever there is a job that inconveniences their hunting or inconveniences their sports or inconveniences their playtime, they'll cut that job loose so that they can go and have some fun. And then they'll just find a job later. So after the age of 18, the average American moves 9.1 times in their adult life. And that could be because you're going to a different city to move, or it could be because you are upgrading to a bigger house. Again, millennials are actually dropping that number down because 40% of millennials, like people my age to 18, are staying home with their parents longer. Like 30-year-olds staying, the meme is 30-year-olds staying in their mother's basements, and it's like a true statistic. So we're bringing, we're unhappy with our jobs, and we are staying home longer, and it is really frustrating to people. And in a recent Gallup study, 24% of adults reported moving within the country within the last 5 years. So how many of you have lived in the same place all your life? Okay. How many of you have moved away and then come back? How many of you have moved at least 5 times in your adult life? Okay, so some of y'all can understand what this is like. Some of you have moved away and come back for various reasons. Maybe you left to go somewhere else, to go to another county to teach, or maybe you had to go to a different state because of the job market or whatever. We all have experienced, or maybe those of you who served in the military, Uncle Sam told you, you will get up and you will go to this place. And so you lived, according to not your own desires perhaps, to go somewhere else and live. So all of us know that there are plenty of good reasons to get up and move. But maybe sometimes we don't connect with that because maybe we know people who have lived in the same area their whole lives. Or maybe you have lived in the same area your whole life. You've never ventured outside Doddridge County, which hopefully some of y'all do because the stores are in Clarksburg or Parkersburg. But many of you, it's hard to imagine people moving around so much in their lives. But I know many of you, like I said, have moved away and moved back, moved different times because of jobs or government service or whatever. But really, you can see the huge mobility all around us. How many people license plates from Oklahoma or Texas do you see? And even though you might curse them, they are here because they're chasing jobs. And what is really interesting is there are actually people who have moved from West Virginia out west to Oklahoma and different places to find jobs over there, which is kind of crazy. They're going out there to find oil and gas jobs, and they're coming here for oil and gas jobs. Why don't people just stay where they're at and have the oil and gas jobs? It's the same jobs. I don't know. It's like why do we export oil and import oil at the same time? Well, it seems more efficient to use what you have here. But I'll get out of global politics and economics because I have no idea about that. But really, when you look at the culture at large, we have a greater ability to be mobile. Transportation is relatively cheap, and it is quicker. It is more efficient. Gas prices are pretty low. Like back in the day, you'd have to ride a horse, and that horse is kind of slow. Or back, some of y'all can remember when the 4-lane wasn't here, and it would take you 2 hours to get to Clarksburg. I mean, those are the days long gone. And so now, we live within 2 hours of you can be in Pittsburgh to watch some crazy football team or baseball team, or you can be 2 hours and you can be in the middle of a national forest, away from everything. We have everything that we could possibly desire or want to do within just a short afternoon or morning drive somewhere. And so we can be really, really mobile. And this makes it so that our roots are not very deep. They're kind of shallow. For example, you can say, well, I feel like just kicking off for the weekend and going to New York City. For example, it's only about 8 hours away. We're just going to drive to New York City for the fun of it because it's cheap. So I don't know that's really cheap, but you get the picture. You can just go off, and so maybe you don't go to church because you'd rather have fun. And that has had a negative impact. This whole mobility of culture, moving around a lot because of jobs, or even being able to go and kick off on the weekends because it's so easy and cheap, has had a negative impact on the church as a whole. Churches are more like rivers than lakes. People flow in and flow out rather quickly. Maybe because of moving for jobs, or maybe because of people die, or people are displeased with things, or maybe they're just in a different life situation and they have to go to a different city or area that more accommodates them. For example, people move to like Arizona and Florida when they retire, I guess, because of the weather. Some people do it because of the climate is better for their breathing and all that sort of stuff. And people are a lot more busy seeking a lot of things and activities rather than stopping and spending time to be with God and one another. Now listen to this. This is a description of American culture back from 1840. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America that the American is always in a hurry. Besides the good things that he possesses, he every instant fancies 1,000 others that death will prevent him from trying if he does not try them soon. This thought fills him with anxiety, fear, and regrets. That was a description of American society 170 years ago, and how much greater are our appetites for fun and for entertainment and for hobbies and trying to do all the things that we want to do because we're going to miss out. Our kids, if we don't put them in everything, they're going to miss out. If I don't do all the things that I want to do, I'm going to miss out if I don't hunt, if I don't fish, if I don't learn to play the violin, if I don't learn to do rock climbing, if I don't learn French and Spanish and all these languages that somebody ought to want to learn. If I don't do all of these things before I die, and we get this constant momentum and desire and all unsettledness to do everything under the sun. And so we tend to be spiritual nomads. Sometimes we go from church to church, or we go from religion to religion, or go from one faith to the next, or we're so unfocused on developing our faith that we are very sporadic. We're blown around by every wind of doctrine that comes our way. But in order for us to have real spiritual fruit, for us to have a good, healthy, meaningful religious experience, we have to have deep roots. We have to have deep roots that reach to Christ. We have to have deep roots with the church. We have to have deep roots for our community. Deep roots are absolutely essential to spiritual fruits. Or to say it a different way, that kind of lines up with our scripture passage today, that we need to remain in Christ. We need to remain with the church, and we need to remain for the community. And in order for this to happen, in order for us to have spiritual fruit, in order for us to have deep roots, we must be willing to remain. Say this with me, okay? This is interactive time. No roots. Paulos, listen. No roots. No fruits. So, in order for us to illustrate this, we're going to be looking at John chapter 15. I know in the bulletin it says 1 John. I don't know what happened there, but it's in John chapter 15 because there are not 15 chapters in 1 John. You'll be way in Revelation before you get there. This is an awesome passage that Jesus, this is a teaching that Jesus is giving to his disciples. They had just celebrated the Last Supper. And after the Last Supper, they had gone into the Garden of Gethsemane, Gethsemane, where he is going to teach his disciples some more, and he is to pray. And prior to this, he had told them, I am going away. I'm going to go prepare a place for you. I'm going to give you the Holy Spirit. I'm going to be delivered. I'm going to be betrayed and delivered over to the authorities. I'm going to suffer and die. So things are in a really cheery mood as they're going into this garden. And so as they are there, this is one of the teachings that he is going to be giving them about remaining in him. So let's go ahead and begin reading at verse 1. I forgot something. So as he is giving this teaching, most of this is applicable to all believers, but there are some things, because he is speaking to the apostles, he's speaking to the disciples, there are some things that he says that are kind of weird that don't actually apply to us, so we'll skip over them, ignore them. But for the most part, the things that he is teaching here are universal principles that apply to all of us. And so the thing that we're going to see most is that to produce fruits, we need to have deep roots. And we can't have deep roots if we don't abide, if we don't remain with Jesus. So in verse 1 of 15 we read this: I am the true vine, and my Father is a gardener. Every branch in me that does not produce fruit he removes, and he prunes every branch that produces fruit, so that it will produce more fruit. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. So John here is using an agricultural analogy. Many of you can sympathize with. There's many people in the region of Galilee and around Jerusalem that people had their own gardens. Many of you have your own gardens. And one of the things that they would plant in their garden, in their little farm, was a vine, a grapevine, so that they could have their own grapes that they would use to make wine, and they would use to make maybe some preservatives, some fruit spread to put on their bread. They would just eat grapes when it was, when they were fresh on the vine. You could just, it must have been really tasty on a warm afternoon to just bite into some nice, tasty, fresh grapes. And so this was a metaphor that they were very familiar with. There were little vines, little vineyards all over the land. Everybody who had a garden had a vine because it was something that you could count on, if properly taken care of, to yield fruit year after year after year. And so Jesus helps us to understand this analogy that he is the vine. He is the thing that all the branches are attached to. He is the one who supports, sustains. He brings all the nutrients to the branches as they need the things, they get the things that they need to survive. He gives life and support to all the branches. And then he says that God is the gardener. His job is to ensure that the vine is producing fruit, that all the branches are producing fruits. And then he says that we are the branches that are expected to be bearing fruits. And so what are the types of fruit that we can expect to produce in our lives? Well, when you read the scriptures, when you read Paul's letters especially, when you read Jesus' teachings, it is very well understood that the fruit that we're supposed to bear includes faith, hope, love, and righteousness. And then in Galatians chapter 5, Paul gives us a really good list. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. The fruit that we are supposed to bear, there are many different characteristics, but these are some of them. He says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The law is not against such things. So these are the different aspects of the fruit that we are supposed to be bearing as Christians. It's not an optional thing. It's not something that you can say, well, I'll get around to growing this fruit. It is something that is absolutely essential to our faith. And if you don't believe me, look at what Jesus says here. What happens if a branch is not producing fruit? What does the gardener do? Cuts it off. And then it's gathered and thrown in the fire. There is a little hint of hell talk there. So this is serious business. But then there's also some not good news to those who are bearing fruits. What does he do to the branches that are producing fruits? He prunes them. So either way, you get cut. So it's better to be cut and produce good fruit than it is to be cut and thrown into a fire. Word of warning there. But bearing fruit ensures that you will be pruned. It is an essential. All of you who have grown anything know that who have grown something and it survived. Okay, know that pruning is very important for things. If you have an apple tree that has too many branches, it's not going to produce very good apples. You have to cut some of those branches off. It's very important. But it's not fun. To be pruned, to be cut so that you can grow is very uncomfortable. We have the Holy Spirit in us who convicts us concerning sin, righteousness, and judgment. Being convicted, in other words, having God take his size 13 steel-toe boots and step on your toes is not fun. It's worse than kicking your little toe on the table. It is painful. But then when you read in Scripture and you find out that you are wrong about something, that can be humiliating. Or maybe that you have to put in some effort to live out your faith. And that's not always easy or fun. It's a lot like work, and work is a 4-letter word. And we often have to endure suffering and trials. None of us like to endure suffering and trials. In these times, we most often ask, why God? Why am I going through this? To illustrate how unbearable it is. Merrill C. Tenney, in his commentary on this passage, says this: in pruning a vine, 2 principles are generally observed. First, all dead wood must be ruthlessly removed. And second, the live wood must be cut back drastically. Dead wood harbors insects and diseases and may cause the vine to rot, to say nothing of being unproductive and unsightly. Live wood must be trimmed back in order to prevent such heavy growth that the life of the vine goes into the wood rather than into the fruits. The vineyards in the early spring look like a collection of barren, bleeding stumps, but in the fall they are filled with luxuriant purple grapes. As the farmer wields the pruning knife on his vines, so God cuts dead wood out from among his saints and often cuts back the living wood so far that his method seems cruel. Nevertheless, from those who have suffered the most often comes the greatest fruitfulness. So God is going to work to ensure that we as individuals, that we as a congregation, that we as the global church, that we are bearing fruits. But we are not just supposed to bear fruit once and be done. We are to keep on bearing fruit, and then we're supposed to keep on bearing fruit, and then we're supposed to keep on bearing fruit. We are a grapevine. We are not a tomato plant. Tomato plants you plant 1 year, they bring about the fruit, and then what happens? They die, and then you have to start the whole process. I wish there was a tomato plant that would live year after year. It would save some of y'all lots of work, but that's not how it works. So tomato plants, you plant it, it grows up and it bears its fruit and it dies. But grapevines, if you take care of them, will bring a harvest year after year after year. So we are a grapevine. We are not a tomato plant. Even though some of you want to throw tomatoes at me, that's okay. So we are supposed to keep on growing and bearing fruits. So picking up in verse 4, Jesus says, "Remain in me, and I in you. Just as the branch is unable to produce fruit by itself unless it remains on the vine, neither can you unless you remain in me." So in order for us to bear fruit, we have to remain. We must remain with Jesus. And he flat out says it, that you do not have the power, you do not have the ability to grow fruit on your own. A branch that is disconnected from the vine will not grow fruit. If you think that it is possible, I have some real estate to sell you on a beachfront somewhere that I don't own. But I'll still sell it to you anyway. It is impossible for a branch that is dead and is off the vine to grow any fruit. And so, likewise, if we are not connected to Jesus, we cannot grow fruit. It is a scientific impossibility. And don't come to me about like those plants that you can cut off the branch and stick it in a piece of water and it starts growing. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a grapevine. Don't get smart. So if a branch falls off the vine, what happens to it? It dies. And you have to go and pick it up. And that's another chore. So it is imperative that we remain with Jesus. Then he goes on to say in verse 5, I am the vine, and you are the branches. The one who remains in me, and I in him, produces much fruit. Not a little fruit, not some fruit every once in a while, but much fruit. Because he can do nothing without me. If anyone does not remain in me, he is thrown aside like a branch and it withers. They gather them, throw them into the fire, and they are burned. Again, some more judgment talk. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you want, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you produce much fruit and prove to be my disciples. So Jesus helps us understand the necessity, the importance of remaining with him, the fact that we cannot bear fruit on our own. But buried in here, there are some promises that I want us to be reminded of. And that is when we connect, the first one is when we connect to Jesus, we will bear fruit. It is a promise that when we are spending time with him, when we are fully connected with him, when we're spending a lot of time with him, we will bear fruit. It is a natural byproduct of the time that you are spending with Jesus. For example, some of you, when you're newly married, when you're in a fresh relationship with a person you marry, there are a lot of things that you do differently. You each have your own habits and oddities and everything. But as you grow older in your marriage, you start to sound like your spouse. Like the things that Sarah says to the kids, I pick up on, and I sound like Sarah when I'm talking to the kids. Or some of the weird oddities that I say and do, sometimes Sarah picks up on those things because she spends a lot of time with me. And I am so sorry for my kids. They are my children. They pick up on my oddities because they spend time with me. So please forgive them, give them grace because they're my children. Because they spend time with us. They pick up our peculiarities, which is important for us. Go, your kids are going to love Star Wars, Hunter. Which is also important for us as parents to model the right things because those are the things that the kids are going to pick up. Because those who we spend time with, we're going to be like them. So if we spend time with Jesus, we will be bearing fruit. Also, Jesus says that there's this awesome promise of prayer, that when we ask, that we will receive. So we can have confidence in prayer. We can enter the throne room of God knowing that he wants us there. He wants us to hear it. It's not like some stranger barging into the king's palace. We have been welcomed. We are welcome. We have been invited into his throne room, and we can go with confidence. Now, he's going to clarify this. Not that you get everything that you want. You won't always get what you want. But you will get what you need. Okay. So, and he also says that God will be glorified. That as we live the way that in close proximity to Jesus, as we stay connected to him, God will be given glory because it is a natural outflow of what we are doing. And we have the promise that our faith will be proved to be genuine. That as we grow fruit, as we give glory to God, it will show that our faith is real. And that's reassuring for us, and it's reassuring from those who are going around looking at all the vines and seeing which ones have good vintage and which ones don't. And so if you're not bearing fruits, it's probably because you're not remaining with Jesus. You're not connected to him as you should. Or maybe you're trying to do it under your own power. And Jesus says you can't do it under your own power. You do not have the capacity within you to grow all the spiritual fruit you need. You need Jesus. Or maybe you're just complacent that you're happy being a tomato. You grew fruit once and that's okay. But it's really not okay. So we have a lot of good promises to know that when we stay connected to Jesus, But you also might say, well, okay, I'm supposed to remain with Jesus. How do I do that? Joe, give me 4 practical steps for how I can remain connected to Jesus. Because I'm a practical person, I need a checklist, so give me a checklist. Okay, Jesus is about to give you a checklist, but it's not a checklist. It's a relationship. But before we go on reading, as we abide, we got to recognize again that it's not done under our own power. We need to do it under Jesus' power. He is the source of power. We don't have the ability to do it of our own. At the same token, we all have a responsibility to do certain things. Each part of the plant has certain things that it is supposed to do. The branch is supposed to put out little things that eventually turn into leaves. And those leaves have... I'm forgetting the scientific terms, chlorophyll in it that will interact with the sunlight and through photosynthesis help to give energy to the plants. And you have the roots that bring up the water and the nutrients from the soil. All the parts of the plant, they have different roles and tasks and functions that they're supposed to do. Likewise, as followers of Jesus, as branches, there are certain things that we do not to earn God's favor, but as a function of who we are and what we are. So Jesus is going to tell us how to remain, how to stay, how to abide with Jesus. He says, as I have loved you. As the Father has loved me, I also have loved you. Remain in my love. So he tells us right there, how do you stay connected to Jesus to remain in his love? It's like, picture this, Jesus' love is a boat, and you get in the boat with him. You can have a choice to stay in the boat with Jesus, or you have a choice to jump out. And if you're in the middle of a hurricane, I suggest not jumping out. Word of advice. So to remain in Jesus is to remain in his love. But then again, how do we do it? What's the checklist? What am I supposed to do? What is my responsibilities? I need to know so I can do it. Well, Jesus tells us this in verse 10. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you these things so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. This is my command, to love one another as I have loved you. No one has a greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants anymore, because a servant doesn't know what his master is doing. I have called you friends because I have made known to you everything I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce fruit, and that your fruit should remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. This is what I command, to love one another. So here are the 4 things in your checklist. It's not a checklist because it's a relationship that you can do to remain connected to Jesus. The first one is to keep his commands, to do what he has told us to do. The things that Jesus tells us as his followers, they are not optional. A lot of people will say, well, is this, or this? Is it necessary for salvation? If Jesus told you to do it, it is necessary for salvation. If Jesus says that you need to stay in my love, and to stay in my love you need to do things I tell you to do, then it's kind of not for us to argue with God. Jesus is the Lord, meaning he is the one in charge, and we are the ones not in charge, so we do what he says. It's not to earn his favor. It's not to do a checklist or obey the law, but this is because we are spending time with him. We're going to naturally pick up the things that he wants to do. And then, so one of the commands that he has given us is to love one another. Not love one another as you see fit. Not love one another as somebody deserves it. Not love one another depending on your mood of the day. To love one another as Jesus loved us. He laid down his life for us. That is how much he loved us. He suffered and he died at the hands of sinful men because he loved us so much. And so that is the standard that he set that we are to meet in our love for one another. And so that means that we need to be sacrificing for one another. A lot of times people will say, and they will have the courage to say, if a masked gunman, crazy gunman, comes in and starts shooting people, I will stand in front of you and I will take a bullet for you. Which that is a terrible reality in our world. No different than what was faced in the Roman Empire. No different than what Christians in Cambodia are facing this very day or yesterday. It is a reality in life that we will say that I will take a bullet for you because we love each other that much. That is the level. But if we are willing to sacrifice so much for each other on this level, we ought to be able to sacrifice for one another on the little things. It's the little things that get us in trouble. It's the little things that we don't want to submit to each other with in mutual submission to each other. The little things that we make into big things. But if we are willing to lay down our lives for one another, we need to be willing to lay down our passions, our wants, our desires, our wills, sometimes our opinions, sometimes our thoughts or the things that we say. Or sometimes if somebody doesn't deserve our forgiveness, we forgive them anyway because that's what Jesus told us to do. And so to love one another, we need to help each other, support each other, and sacrifice for one another. The third thing that Jesus gives us is prayer. Again, this is the second time that he's brought this up. But here he qualifies it. Here he makes it so it's not ask whatever you want and God will give it to you. He says, ask in my name. Asking in his name means that you're going to ask for things that are in accordance with his will, things that he has told us to pray about. Pray according to his desires, his plans, his future for us. The things that he calls us to pray for include when we are in trouble, that we ask for his help. When we, or maybe that we have opportunities to serve other people, opportunities to share your faith. Or Jesus looked out in the harvest fields and he saw all the people were helpless without a shepherd. And he says, pray that the Father would send workers into the harvest field. And guess what? We are the workers for the harvest field. And one of the things that we should pray is for opportunities for us to go and harvest. We need to pray for wisdom. We need to pray for forgiveness. We need to pray for healing. We need to pray for our leaders, both our church leaders and our national leaders. But we ought not pray for things that are just because of our greed, our selfishness, or sinful desires. In James chapter 4, we are given a strong warning about not having our passions in check, and he addresses this issue of people complaining about not getting what they're praying for. And James says, you ask and you don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. Maybe sometimes the things that we are asking for, God doesn't give us because he knows it will destroy us. So if we're asking for things that he knows is going to destroy us, he's not going to give it. Or if it's going to pull us away from him. It might seem perfectly acceptable. It might seem like a holy thing to have. But maybe it will pull us away from God somehow. And one of the awesome things about this rooted experience that we're gonna do in our groups is there's a powerful prayer experience. Because prayer isn't just something that we tack on in the beginning or end of a service. It's not something we tack on to the beginning or end of a communion meditation. It is an essential part of communicating and communing with God. It is an absolute necessity for us in our lives to access the power that God has in store for us. If we don't pray, if we don't make prayer a priority, then we won't have what we need to persevere and to stay with Jesus and bear fruit. And so the last thing that Jesus tells us, the fourth thing, is to bear fruit. He told his disciples, I have chosen you. And he means that literally. He was walking by the Sea of Tiberias one day. He sees Peter and Andrew and he says, hey, y'all, get out of your boat and come follow me. He sees James and John and everybody says, hey, y'all, come follow me. He was walking and he sees Matthew in his tax booth sucking the money from the people in service to Rome and in service to his pockets. And Jesus says, come, follow me. And he gets up and he leaves his lucrative extortion business and he follows Jesus. Which isn't, I'm not talking about like they literally would say, I am going to put you in jail if you don't pay me X amount of money. Rome says I need this much, I'm going to ask this much, I'm going to put you in jail, take your family away from you, all that stuff if you don't pay me. Like, this was how bad it was. So it was not good. So they get up and they leave. So Jesus, when he says, I have chosen you, he is literally talking to them. I have chosen you. But he has also chosen us through the proclamation of the good news of Christ. That as we hear the good news of Jesus and we accept his offer of salvation, we become choice. We become chosen. We become God's people. As we are submersed into the forgiveness of sins and eternal life, that we are a part of his family. We are chosen. We are his. And then after that, the expectation of the disciples and us is the exact same, that we bear fruits. So say this with me again. No roots, no fruits. But here's a crazy question. I've alluded to this before. Do branches have roots? No! Does your head have a foot? I would demonstrate how silly that would look, but I don't want to do that. You can imagine. Okay, so a branch does not have roots because it is a completely different part of the plant. So how can you as a branch be rooted? Oh, it's a trick question. Branches don't have their own roots. They need the roots of something else. Right? Branches rely on the deep and strong roots of the vine. So we can only be deeply rooted if we are remaining fully with Jesus. We need the nutrients. We need the moisture from the soil. And if we cannot have that, if we are not connected to Jesus. So we need to have roots to produce fruit, but we don't have our own roots. So we need to be connected to Jesus and remain with Jesus. So without being connected to Jesus, we don't have access to what we need to survive, let alone produce fruits. So we need the vine. We need Jesus. We need his deep roots. But not only does the vine need not only the branches need the vine and the roots that the vine has, but the branches need each other. The branches together bear the weight of the fruit. One branch doesn't produce all the fruit. All the branches together produce fruit. They all help bear the load of making the fruits of that vine. All the branches need to be working in unison together in order to have a productive crop. So to produce fruit, we need to have deep roots. We can't have deep roots if we don't remain with Jesus. So I challenge you to get rooted. Get rooted with Jesus. Connect with him. Remain with him fully today for the rest of your lives. And for that, if you want to join us on our Rooted experience or on our Rooted study, you can still join us today at 4 o'clock and join us in our study. We'll assign you to one of the two groups or maybe make a third group if there's so much demand. And we will make it happen. Just might be a delay in getting a book, but that's no big deal. Join a group and go through this experience as a deliberate exercise to discipline yourself to do what you need to do to remain with Jesus. And then once you do that, or even as you're going through the sermon series, give yourself fully to the process. There's a lot of work in our faith and in the study. There's a lot of effort that we have to put into in order for us to be cultivated to be the kind of branches that we need to be. Being a Christian doesn't mean that you get wet, you get dunked, and then for the rest of your life you don't have to do anything. There is work involved in following Jesus. So give yourself fully to what Jesus has through the series, through the study. Fully commit to him and his way. So remain with Jesus. Remain with the church. Remain with our purpose to bear fruit. And as you do this, you will bear fruit.